What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Franchise Unfiltered podcast, the show where we give you the complete, unfiltered, unbiased look into the world of franchising. I came across a video today that I thought was interesting, thought they made some valid points, thought some of their points were off the mark a little bit based on my experience. I don't know who these guys are. The video just popped up in my YouTube feed, but I thought it would be fun to share some of the clips from this video with you guys and some of my thoughts to go with it. So let me share my screen here and we'll dive in.
On today's episode, we're going to discuss franchising, whether you should be a franchisor, whether you should be a franchisee. Is it a good investment, a bad investment, what to look for, what to look out for, as well as how you can position yourself to maximize your return on one if that's the direction you decide to go.
I'm Dennis.
And I'm Greg.
And this is the More Profit, Less Stress podcast,
where we provide the tools for more profit and less stress in your business now so you can turn into a valuable asset later.
First thing I'll say, I love the premise of the show. Too many business owners are way too stressed out. They're not maximizing the profit that they can make in their business. And, they get burnt out after several years. And I can tell you this from my experience at this point, I've helped well over 100 people get into franchise businesses. The primary motivation for almost everyone I've worked with is not solely financial. It's lifestyle driven, right? They are trying to move away from more stress to less stress. They're trying to build a life on their own terms where they're not dictated by someone else's schedule and they're not putting in all of their time, hard work, and energy to build something that someone else owns. So love the premise that these guys are focusing on in their podcast. Figured I would throw that in there.
Well, I think franchising ends up being one of those things that people assume is the fast track to success, right? Like instead of starting a business, I'm not going to be a plumber. I'm going to go buy a plumbing franchise I'm going to buy a moving franchise. I'm going to buy McDonald's is so successful, so my new food franchise will be absolutely phenomenal because McDonald's was phenomenal. It becomes this excuse to go buy a business or do something that you assume is going to be successful because it has a name attached to it. And it's funny because I think the failure rate around franchises is no different than the failure rate among everybody else. Probably. The only real difference is it looks like your franchise has been in your neighborhood longer, right? Because the owner who couldn't make money got kicked out, and then they moved the next guy in who also couldn't make money. But the building has stayed there and the business has stayed there for a long time.
And it's a really good point because the franchisor is trying to sell franchises. They don't want the market to see it's failing. So when a franchisee's failing, they just move in corporately, take it over, run it for a little bit, sell it to another person. Franchisee. But they won't let it close. So from the consumer's point of view, it looks like it's successful.
Absolutely. Yeah, like it's always been there.
Yeah. And in a lot of cases, like let's say, let's say you buy a normal kind of small franchise. It's maybe a food or retail store. It's always bricks and mortar usually. And you might make, if it's a small business, let's say your salary to work in the business might be 75 to 100 grand. And then you want to make a profit. And let's say you're doing $1 million and the profit.
All right. I want to, before we dive into the numbers that he's talking about here, I just want to first address the comments on failure rate. Look, there's no question people fell in franchises and for a variety of reasons. People fell in very successful franchises. These guys have referenced McDonald's a couple of times already. Probably the most well-known franchise in the world. And for good reason, it's overall got a very successful track record for their franchisees, but people have failed as franchisees in McDonald's. So yes, it does happen. At the end of the day, when you buy a franchise, you own a business. So there's inherent risk that you're taking with that. I just pulled up in Claude here. This is from the SBA. So, I don't know that any of these statistics are, right on the nose in terms of accuracy, but, SBA would have a pretty good grip on this, at least being able to track data on franchise success rates versus independent business success rates for people that have used an SBA loan to get into the business. So according to the SBA, approximately 20 to 25% of franchise businesses fell within the first 5 years. And that's compared to over 50% of independent businesses, independent small businesses that fell within the first 5 years. So, first of all, is what's the definition of failure? I've seen people get 3, 4, 5 years into a franchise, decide to get out, meaning they decide to sell their business. And after the fact, they wouldn't call it a success. They would say, you know what, I didn't accomplish everything I thought I could accomplish with that business. And so, they might classify that as a failure. If you're looking at failure in terms of, hey, the business just completely did not work. It lost money, had to shutter the doors, bankruptcy, things like that. Based on my personal experience, I would say it's quite a bit less than 20 to 25% of franchise businesses that fell. But again, that's from my perspective. But yeah, I don't completely agree with their take that the failure rate or the success rate is the same with franchising as it is in independent small businesses. So now they're going to get into, from their perspective, what to expect from a profit margin standpoint, I think.
So you make $100,000 profit, you make your 75 to 100,000
Wage.
salary. Great. It's a decent living, right? You make 200,000 close to, right? That's great. Except what ends up happening is they don't make a profit. And instead of making 75 to 100,000 salary, they make 30. And so it's surviving.
Yeah.
If in their household, they're the second income, there's the kiss of death right there, actually. If they're the second income in the house, like the non-primary income, it's like more of a kind of hobby thing, then the 30 grand's okay, right? In their mind.
Right.
When they spend, like from your experience, how much have you been seeing people spend on, say, a franchise like that you've seen? Like
they're anywhere between 50 grand and $1 million. It all
Right.
depends on what you're trying to buy.
So can you imagine spending $500,000 for between the franchise fee, the build out, if there's a building or a whatever, right?
And the training you have to go through.
Training, and then you got to buy some kind of inventory or product. Like, yeah, let's say you're 250 to 500 grand probably for a lot to make 30 or 40 or 50 or 60. Like it's crazy.
That would be crazy, right? And I don't know where I'm assuming some of this is just based off of their personal experience from, like I said, I don't know these guys, and I'm not doing this video to, throw any shade at them, as my 9-year-old daughter would say. I think they're in the business of, I think they're consultants of some sort, maybe. So, they work with all types of small business owners, and, they're helping them maximize profitability. So they've had some clients that were franchisees over the years. So I'm assuming maybe some of this is just from their personal experience and perspective. And that's where I'm coming from as well, as, my personal experience and perspective. But, we're kind of just throwing some numbers around, like, let's say you're only making 30 grand a year, and most franchises, I think he said, you're lucky if you have a 5 to 10% profit margin, after the fees and stuff. Listen, I agree. If you're investing $200,000, $300,000, $500,000 in a business, and the expectation is that you're going to get, you're going to have a 5 to 10% profit margin when it's all said and done, and that's going to net you, 30, 40 grand a year. The juice is probably not worth the squeeze, but that would just tell me that you probably didn't do your due diligence on the front end the right way, right? Out of the franchises I work with, and there's plenty of them that are in that, call it $250,000 to $500,000 investment range, including the franchise fee, the build out, startup cost, initial working capital. If they've got franchisees landing between 5 and 10% net profit, and they're only, able to compensate themselves 30 to 40 grand a year, those franchisees are in like the bottom 10% of that system. But these are good established franchise brands that have a proven model and a proven track record of success, with franchisees that come in and follow the system and follow the playbook and execute. That's the key word here, is executing, right? And these guys touch on this. I think that, a lot of times I've seen people have very unrealistic expectations when they're coming into a franchise. This is not a done for you business model. This is a done with you business model. In franchising, you still, as the franchisee, have to put in the effort, have to put in the time. You have to execute in order to get the results. So if you're doing your due diligence the right way, and this is what I coach people through, and if you're looking at good, solid franchise businesses with a track record of success, the type of results that they're talking about and that they're making sound, is kind of widespread across the world of franchising. And these are just kind of the typical results that anyone getting into a franchise is getting. It just doesn't add up. So I don't know where some of I'm assuming this is their personal experience from clients that they've worked with, but I do agree that the type of results they're talking about, it's not anywhere near appealing enough to justify. The other thing I'll point out here, is they're talking about startup costs and things like that. If you're assuming that you're going to go into the same business, it's just a question of, am I doing it through a franchise or starting it independently? Outside of the franchise fee, the expenses are going to look the same, right? If it's a brick and mortar concept, you're still going to have to go find a location and sign a lease. You're still going to have to do a build out. If it's a business that requires inventory, you're still going to have to purchase inventory. I see this all the time when people are weighing the pros and cons of franchising versus an independent business. They start referencing all these expenses that come with starting a franchise, and they kind of neglect to point out that the vast majority of those expenses are going to be there if you want to get into that same business on your own, right? Yes, you have an initial franchise fee that you pay up front in order to become a franchisee. In a good franchise system, there should be enough value clearly exchanged for that franchise fee. It's going to be a protected territory in most cases. That's going to be, initial training and support. If it's like a membership-based model, right? You're getting pre-sales, marketing. They're going to come in and help you prime the market before you even open, with the goal being that you have paying customers, paying members on the day you open your doors for business. And in a good franchise, if you execute, you are going to compress that time to open. You're going to compress that learning curve. And we all know time is money. So if you're saving time, if you're getting to the point of launching your business faster, that's saving you money. The average franchise fee is $50,000 to $60,000 for, a single license or a single territory. If we're talking a $500,000 investment to open a franchise, that $50,000 or $60,000 is the franchise fee. Everything else is the build out cost, your startup expenses, and your working capital, all of which is going to be there if you're starting that same business independently. The difference is, in a franchise, you get a franchise disclosure document where they very clearly break down that estimated investment range for you, so you're not going in blind. You know how many small businesses never get off the ground because they drastically underestimate how much capital they need to start? So if you're looking at going into a business independently and you've been looking at a franchise too, and you're like, well, holy crap, man, this franchise, it is telling me it's going to be $500,000 to get the business open. I don't want to pay the franchise. You're not paying the franchise $500,000. You're paying the franchise $50,000 or $60,000, and they're going to coach you. They're going to give you a system and a playbook to follow that's going to help you avoid mistakes along the way to opening. In a lot of cases, they're going to have discounts that they're able to pass along to their franchisees that are going to lower your startup and your build out costs. And so it's just, yeah, I don't know. I see people make this argument all the time, and there's some validity to it, right? Yes, you have a franchise fee that you wouldn't have if you were starting that business on your own. Everything else is still an expense you're going to incur if you want to get into that business.
Yeah. So in our definition, that's failure.
Well, and then you add a complexity in there. If the average business only makes 5% net profit, and the average franchise
the average one fails.
Right. No, but this is the point.
Yeah.
If the average business makes 5% net profit, but the average franchise fee is 5%.
Yeah.
Well, then already when you bought the franchise, you set yourself up to do zero.
Sorry, guys. The math is not mathing for me. So when they say franchise fee in this context, I assume they're referring to the royalty, right? So what I was referring to earlier, the $50,000 to $60,000, that's the initial franchise fee that's paid one time upfront. That's what gets you access to everything that you get as a franchisee. In most franchises, you're securing a protected territory, rights to operate under the brand name, trademarks, training support, anything proprietary that comes with that. They're referring to, when they talk about the 5% here, they're referring to the royalty, which is, in most franchises, it's 5%. Well, I mean, the range varies, 5, 6, 7, 8% of gross revenue. That's going to be on an ongoing basis. I have no idea where they're getting average profit margins of 5%. And again, if you're doing the due diligence on a franchise and you're trying to get a sense of what a realistic profit margin is, and you're not already accounting for the royalty, you're missing the boat on the due diligence, right? So if you're coming into a business expecting 5%, because that's the average, I don't see any franchises in my world where the average is a 5% profit margin. Nobody would buy them. But then if you're saying, okay, well, hey, 5%, that's pretty good. I could get on board with this for 5%. Oh shit, I forgot to calculate the royalty. It's 5%. So I'm actually, now expecting a zero profit margin. You didn't do the due diligence. So I don't know where they're getting these numbers from. You should always, obviously factor in the expenses, the fee structure in a franchise as you're modeling out the financials. We call it the unit economics. So yeah, I don't quite know where that's coming from.
And now most franchises don't operate at 5%. They also add in a 2.5% to a 5% marketing fee,
right,
depending on how it's structured, where they say, well, we'll market for you. And part of what you think you're buying is the fact that they're going to do all of this marketing for you, but 2.5% and $100,000 is not a whole lot for them to go play with to help you market more.
Right.
So it's one of those things when you walk into it, you better be very careful. And my experience is the vast majority of franchisees that I've worked with, the franchisor has a great system for selling the food or the stuff that they bring to market, but almost none of them have a really detailed business training side of things.
Yeah, none, or very few. Agreed. And even lots of them might actually be, they do a great, I don't know, they make a great ice cream, or they make a great
coffee,
or they some kind of unique bench or whatever.
I'm not familiar with any bench making franchises, but yeah, I mean, look, the training needs to be there. That is part of what you're getting. So again, as you're doing the due diligence, these are things that you need to be looking into. These guys are using very broad strokes when, they talk about, well, the average franchise fails. Where are you finding that? I mean, I just did a video last week on the article The Economist put out. I may not get these numbers exactly right off the top of my head, but 850,000 franchise locations across the U.S., 250,000 unique franchise owners, something like 4 million or maybe 9 million people employed across all of these franchise businesses, and 3 or 4% of the GDP in the U.S. comes from franchising. And this is not like this just started happening in the last couple of years. This has been going on for decades, and it's been steadily increasing. That doesn't happen if the average franchise fails, or the average franchise makes no money, or the average franchise makes a 5% profit before you factor in the 5% royalty to the franchisee. So I would push back a little bit and say, where's the data? I understand you may have had some clients that were in franchises that had this experience. These things do happen, but they do not happen regularly when you're dealing with good, high quality franchisors that really understand that it's a partnership at the end of the day, and they as the franchisor are not going to be successful long term if their franchisees are not in a position to run their business profitably. And if the franchise has a track record of success, you don't see the type of things these guys are talking about occurring on a regular basis. Average simply means it's what happens the majority of the time. Every franchise out there is going to have examples of people that have failed. It just comes with the territory of business ownership. Not everybody is cut out for business ownership at the end of the day. So it doesn't matter how good your systems are, how good your training is, how good your widget is, whatever the product or service is that you're selling, you will still have people that come in and they don't execute. And don't get me wrong on this. There are franchises out there that I would not advise anyone to get involved in, because the value exchange is not there. The business model itself is not, set up to sustain long term. The unit economics are not strong enough. So those do exist, right? My point is simply that there are many really, really solid franchise opportunities. So when these guys use this broad language and just make it sound like it's this very rare exception of people that are actually successful in franchising, it just doesn't track.
The issue is, at that moment in time, to your point, they don't have the business acumen or system to make it profitable. But everybody says, but customers love it. Like, this is the greatest thing. Well, let's franchise it. Yeah. So this is, and I guess
which is great if you're the franchisor in a way.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's a reason why there's a lot of businesses that will jump straight to franchising, because as a franchisor, it's a really good way to get cash injections, is to sell somebody the franchise.
Right.
I was having a conversation with someone on LinkedIn.
So look, I agree. There's definitely some risk that comes with getting in early stage with a franchise, and there are companies that franchise their business too early. I think he goes on to give an example of someone that he was talking to that, was setting up to franchise their business before they had even launched a proof of concept. Okay. Yeah. I'd be pretty wary, going in and buying into a franchise where the franchisor has not even yet operated the business themselves. But this is not a common thing that I see. Yes, you're always going to have early stage emerging franchise opportunities out there. Some people are going to be better suited for those. Some people are, going to be much better suited for a more mature, established franchise system. The whole, we're going to franchise because we need cash injection. I mean, guys, to do this right, you need at least $500,000 to get your business set up appropriately to start franchising. I'm not saying that there aren't companies out there that have kind of bootstrapped it, but no intelligent business owner that's really thought through their expansion strategy and researched franchising as an avenue to expand and decided that that's the route they want to go is coming into it saying, well, let's just franchise our business next week because we're a little bit strapped for cash. So, man, we'll franchise next week. Week after that, we'll be selling franchises and we'll just have all this cash flooding in. It's not how it goes, guys. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars. You've got to hire franchise attorneys. You've got to get your documentation together. You've got to get your branding, your trademarks, all of this together. And then you got to figure out how to attract and bring in the right type of candidate that you want to be your franchise partners. That is not something that you just flip a switch and do overnight. That's not something that is free to do in most cases. So I don't agree with the point at all that most companies are franchising just because they need a cash injection. That's pretty backwards. Most franchisors, if they've really done their research and if they have good guidance, there's a lot of experts out there that will help founders franchise their business and go about it the right way. If they've taken any of those steps, they know that that decision to franchise is not like an overnight cash injection that they're going to have. It's a long road and a lot of capital that the franchisor is investing, usually for years before they expect to see any sort of a profitable return from the franchise system itself. But yeah, people, businesses deciding to franchise because, their friends and families and their customers are telling them, hey, we love this and this should be everywhere. There's definitely examples of franchises out there that have launched probably too soon without really building out the support system, without having the business acumen and the ability to train and teach other people, how to replicate the success that they've had. That's legit. It happens for sure. And that's part of, doing the right due diligence and making sure that you're looking at not just the right type of franchise for you, but a franchise in general that is actually set up for success, that all the ingredients for success are there in the picture.
Because other people should be able to do it. Great. And then the new franchisee comes in, there's no proof of concept, and they start operating and they don't make money. And the worst thing is that maybe they make that, 10 to 30 grand a year wage, no profit. It's like, well, gee, knock on wood, maybe next year will be better. And they just keep going. And they just and then they finally have some years where they don't make money, or they get fed up and they want out because their spouse is like, hey, you spent $300,000 of our assets to open this thing and you're making 20 grand a year. Like, this isn't working out. So then they get frustrated and the person's like, okay, well, we got to sell. And then they sell the next person who thinks, oh, knock on wood, it's going to be better next year. And it's just this cycle. And back to your point, it's because they don't have the business acumen or proof of concept. They didn't.
So again, these examples are out there, but they're talking about it like this is the norm. And, successful franchises are like the rare minority, and it's just not the case. And not to mention, if you have a, quote unquote, failing franchise location, you're not going to just, as the franchisor, you're usually not able to just say, hey, you're not doing a good enough job, so you're out and we're going to sell this to someone else. Yes, there are ways that franchisors, if the franchisee has breached the contract, just like in any contract, if the franchisee is breaching their contract, there are ways that the franchisor can essentially kick the franchisee out of the system. This is not a common occurrence either. And even if that happens, now you've got a failing business. Like, you're not going to just turn around and seamlessly sell that to some other sucker, right? I mean, these guys just seem to kind of have the opinion that, anyone buying a franchise is a sucker, and they're just set up for failure from day one, and no account whatsoever for, the literally hundreds of thousands of successful franchise locations out there. I was just talking to a guy yesterday that bought into a brick and mortar franchise, opened his first location about 6 years ago. He's got 5 of them open today, and he just went under contract to sell his business for $6.5 million. Right? He's not making a wage of, $10,000 to $30,000 a year in that business. He's made good income over the 5 to 6 years that he's owned the business, but that's not even where the real upside is. The real upside is the point where he's at now, where he's built a profitable business that he can sell for multiple 7 figures. And this guy will never have to work again in his life if he doesn't want to, right? There's tons of these stories out there. You could almost argue there's more of those types of stories than there are the people that have gotten into a franchise and ultimately not been successful.
Now, the flip side is it can be really good for people who can't figure out the business acumen. If you join a franchise where they've got proof of concept, the franchisees are making money. So there's your litmus
And by the way,
test.
making money, not making revenue.
Yeah. And making a profit after a wage.
Right.
So if you're ever thinking about buying a franchise, phone a bunch of them, talk to the owners. Now, they're probably not going to give you the truth because they don't
Franchisees might.
hopefully.
Right.
Yeah. So maybe I spoke too soon. He did come around to make the point that, there are good franchises out there. And yes, do your due diligence, right? You need to understand the numbers. You need to understand the unit economics, right? And you need to understand what is realistic earning potential in this franchise. The franchisor is not going to be able to guarantee anything. Legally, they can't guarantee anything, but even if they could, even if it wasn't illegal to make earnings claims, there's no way they can actually guarantee results, because guess what? The results largely depend on you as the franchise owner and how well you execute. So you need to understand the numbers. You need to see that there is a clear pathway to a profitable business and the type of income that you would be happy with given the financial investment, the time investment. And you also need to look further ahead than just the first 1 or 2 years. I'm going to do a separate video on this, because this is something I see trip people up all the time. They're doing what they should be doing in terms of, due diligence and really understanding the unit economics, but they forget to look out past the first year, or they forget to look out past the first 2 years, right? Very few businesses out there, franchise or not, are you going to look at year one results only and say, yeah, this is probably worth the amount of time, money, and energy that I would need to put into it for those results, right? Even if the business profits $100,000 in the first year, which is pretty good by most business standards, $100K profit in the first year, but it's a $400,000 investment to get there. If you kind of forget that, hey, if I build this right and execute, I'm not just going to get that in the first year. I'm going to continue to get that. And in all likelihood, I'm going to be able to continue to build and scale and optimize and improve not only the profit margin, but grow the top line. So just don't be short-sighted. Don't lose sight of the forest through the trees when it comes to that. And then also don't forget about the potential upside, right? People buy and sell franchises all the time, right? People make life-changing money when they build their franchise business successfully and sell it, just like people who build their own independent business successfully can sell it and make life-changing money. There's no guarantee of that. You have to execute, but just don't lose sight of the longer term picture. It's very natural to want to feel like, hey, I can get through that first year of the business. So I'm not saying that you shouldn't really look closely at, okay, what could I realistically expect, in terms of a timeline to breaking even, a timeline to being able to start turning a profit, a timeline to recouping my initial investment. All of those things matter, but you're not doing this to just own a business for 1 or 2 years in most cases. So, and then yes, call franchisees, talk to franchisees. That's by far the most valuable part of this process, researching franchises. I agree with the bearded gentleman here. Most franchisees are going to shoot you straight. They don't really have any incentive to do otherwise. I talk to people all the time that are looking at the franchises my wife and I own. And, I tell them what we like about it. I tell them what our franchisor does well. I also tell them what our franchisor is not doing as great of a job in, because they realistically need to know, like, hey, here's some gaps in the support. So these are things you need to be prepared to figure out or handle on your own. I shoot them straight with what the challenges are, right? We're in a very sales and marketing intensive business in one of our franchises. And so you need to be prepared for that. The hardest part of that business is finding and training good salespeople, right? So it's not in my interest as a franchisee to try to oversell someone that's looking at a franchise, right? For them to just come in with wildly unrealistic expectations and fail. That's not good for the brand. Guess what? I'm vested in the overall success of the brand as a franchisee, not just my local franchise business. So yeah, I don't really see instances where franchisees are not shooting people straight. And there's a lot of ways that you can, be very strategic in terms of, talking to enough franchisees, the variety of franchisees you're talking to in terms of, the amount of time they've been in business, the geographic area that they're in, people that have a similar background to yours prior to getting into the franchise. I mean, there's a lot of ways you can really kind of be strategic and make sure that you're getting as much value as possible from those validation calls. So I'm going to leave it here for this video. Again, no shade to these fellas. I love the premise of what they're doing with their podcast. I think every business owner should be, working towards running a more profitable, less stressful business. It can absolutely be done through franchising. And as I say all the time, not all franchises are created equally. So, to a lot of the points that they made here today, there are people that have found themselves in these situations. They've found themselves in these situations in some cases in overall successful franchises. And then there are franchises that are just not built and set up correctly to really support franchisees and have a strong enough value exchange for what it costs to be a franchisee. And so that's where I can help, guys. This is what I do all day, every day. I talk to franchise companies. I research franchise companies. I talk to people that are looking at franchising, and in many cases, they're just like these guys are talking about. They're weighing the pros and cons between, should I go the franchise route? Should I go start my own thing? Should I go acquire, an existing non-franchise business? There's no one perfect right or wrong answer, but I can tell you this very, very definitively based on my own personal experience and the experience of many other people I know. Franchising can absolutely be a great avenue to success as a small business owner, but you need to make sure you're looking at the right franchises, and you need to make sure you're looking at the right type of franchise for you. So if any of this caught your attention or piqued your energy, I'd love to have a conversation with you. My calendar link will be somewhere around this video. Reach out to me and would love to help. And until then, go drop in.